we always talk sports, and analogies for me was always sports related. It was like, if you're building a perfect basketball team, you're not going to pick 5 point guards or 5 centers, right? Like, you could pick the 5 most dominant big men in the game, and you probably aren't winning an NBA championship because you don't have the person that is a floor general that has the ball handling that, or you could pick the 5 fastest players and they may not be able to shoot. So it's like the best teams sometimes need people with very different skill sets and then a coach to kind of say, this is how we work together. Welcome to the 24/7 Artist Podcast. I'm your host, Yudu Jr., and I'm so excited to have you here. The podcast is really just a chance to share the conversation part of my life, right? My success is tied to 2 things. I have conversations and I ask a bunch of questions and learn from people in various fields and various backgrounds and experiences. And then I go do the thing, right? And those 2 things together is why I've found my success. And I'm really excited about my first guest, my first conversation, because this is one that I've had 1,000 times. This is someone that I've leaned on 1,000 times, someone I've learned from 1,000 times and will continue to. And that is Dr. Brett Bell. Dr. Bell is a PhD in psychology, so we call him Dr. Bell. But on this convo,
we'll call me Brett. But
we'll call him Brett because he'll kill me. He's a Philly boy. He'll kill me if I call him Dr. Bell all day. But Brett, please tell the folks a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So nice to be here. Really excited to have this conversation. The conversations that you and I have had for 3-4 years now, probably thousands of countless hours. And you say you've leaned on me, but I've certainly leaned on you, and I think that's the power of a great relationship. It's the reciprocity piece. So I just wanted to say that I'm super psyched to be here and talking with you and giving your audience a chance to listen and learn from the conversations that we've had together, because I know I've learned a lot from that. Like you said, my background's in psychology. It's more about me, but I guess my educational and professional background is in psychology. I practiced clinical psychology for a couple of years, but it became more about the paperwork and less about helping other people. And so I became incredibly just upset about that and disenfranchised about that, and decided to take what I've learned about people, about myself, about business. And, when we all come to work, or when we work with people, we're just working with people, regardless of what field we're in. It all comes down to people. So just really, took that concentration in organizational and industrial psychology, which I took in graduate school, and applied those same principles to business. And I've been working across industry for the last, now I'm going to date myself. The last 15, you can see my grades, the last 15 or 16 years, have met incredible people like you do, and have had the pleasure and the opportunity to work with a lot of great leaders. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to work with a lot of poor leaders, and I've learned a lot from both. So I'm just really happy to be here and having this conversation with you.
Awesome. Thank you. So, for the first ever convo for a artist music business podcast, I'm having a conversation with a psychologist, which might throw people off. And but specifically, the reason we came together was you have a background in IO psychology, and and one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is what you said. Business is really about people, right? You're either dealing with the people that you work with, the people that you're working for, the people that work for you, the people that work with you. And then ultimately you have a customer or consumer that has to buy or pay for something for the business to work. And so if you don't understand people and how they think and how they feel, you will find yourself struggling. So give us a Philly, what is IO psychology? Again, like, we don't want like the big terms. We want someone who's,
I don't even know those big terms anymore.
Starting out, what is IO psychology?
It's really kind of the science of understanding an organization, right? And it's an organization, no matter how big or small it is made in a certain structure, and really understanding that structure and how that structure or that dynamic works, depending on the business that you're in. There's big corporate structure, which is pretty complex and intertwined, and there's a lot of interdependent parts. And then there's, entrepreneurs like a lot of your audience, artist entrepreneurs who work in a smaller structure, but the structure still remains. And it's understanding the dynamic of that structure and what works in that structure that will work best for you or your business.
I love it. So ultimately, you said the word structure, which I can laugh now because when we first met, we had, our company had a lot of big ideas, big visions, big dreams. My previous company, and 24/7 does too, but now we're applying what I've learned from you. But our previous company had big visions, big dreams, but I think a lack of structure.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you came in and you were helping us get organized, I remember being skeptical. I think of like, what is this dude doesn't know the music business? Like, how can he come in and help us? But I very quickly learned that, business is business, people are people. And it boiled down to like some very, very simple conversations that we would have that kind of helped me and then ultimately helped the company grow. So I kind of want to run through some of those combos we had, right? So I'll start with, I think we even get to the assessment, just communication, right? So one of the things that I learned from you is that everyone doesn't communicate the same, right? And it's, now it makes sense, right? When you say it out loud, it's like, of course that's not the case. But when you're an entrepreneur, you kind of do a lot for yourself early on. A lot of the artists we're dealing with will be their own manager, they'll be their own agent, their own engineer, their own graphic designer. But as they find success and they start bringing on these team members, they'll basically want that person to do what they did and often how they did it. And that was kind of what I was, right? I was like, I know how to do 20 things and I'm bringing 20 people around to help me, but they're not doing it like me. And I would go to you so frustrated and you would often say, well, Yudu, how are you communicating what you want? Yep. So can you speak to the importance of like communication?
I mean, it's everything, right? And let's move outside of business for a second. And like, I always try to take things down to the most basic levels, right? Fundamental levels. Like, I think it's one thing, and just in our culture right now in America, right, where everything is there's so much specialty and there's so many people studying so many different things, and so there's all these specialists in all these different fields, right? And what we miss, I think, and I'll get to your point in a second, what we miss are the basic fundamentals, the blocking and tackling. Like for any of your audience out there who's played sports, like, you just use the football analogy, right? Football is a very complex game, but at the end of the day, you got to be able to block and you got to be able to tackle. So when you talk about communication is the essence to any relationship, right? If you look at how we are as human beings, right, we rely so much on communication, and communication is what you do. You and I are doing right now. We're speaking, right? But there's so much more to communication, right? It's your nonverbals, right? Is being set, like, as you grow as a professional, as you grow as a person, being more self-aware, and how you're coming off, how your facial expressions, the intonations of your voice, not just looking at what you're trying to get across, but what kind of understanding what that person needs, right? And understanding how they learn. Like, I think it's really important for people to we all learn differently, right? I could go into our public school settings and even our private school settings in this country. It's like, there's still a lack of appreciation and a lack of understanding of the differences in how people learn. And that is fundamental to how you relate to other people. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be a psychologist. You just have to practice a little self-awareness and understand that we all see the world extremely differently based on so many different factors that your audience doesn't have to know about. They just have to be aware of. And really, when you look at that one-to-one communication with someone, that diet of someone is really trying to, the word empathy is thrown out around a lot, right? And it's great if people are practicing empathy. I think that's great, but it's more of just sort of this throwaway, like, I'm empathic, right? But really understanding when you're communicating with somebody is not what you're trying to get across, but what you need them to know and how they need to be communicated with. So I think it starts with just a little self-awareness. Just start practicing that. Like, everybody sees the world differently, and it's based on a variety of things. And your job isn't really to understand that. It's just to know it.
I love it. No, it's amazing because I remember early on when I finally broke down and tried to implement some of what I was picking up from our convos. And I used words and phrases that I'd never used before. And then I saw like a glimmer in people's eyes and excitement in the work and the work actually getting done. And it was simple things like I would explain something and then I would say, so just so we're clear, can you tell me what you heard me just say, like what's expected? And then I would hear them say something and be like, well, no, that's not it at all. And one of the things I learned from you in communication is like, if they don't get it, if I tell you to do something and you don't do it right, then I have to look at like how I communicated first, right? And that's, like you said, self-awareness, as opposed to, oh, they did it wrong again. And now I would find myself getting really frustrated with people that I worked with, like, oh my God, like I could just do it. Like that was like my like my thing was like, oh, I'll just do it. And then you're like, no, you can't build a company where you just do it, because then they get accustomed to that.
Yep.
So like take a little bit of time and just make sure you're communicating effectively.
Yeah, I think time, often we don't have the luxury of time, or we think we don't have the luxury of time. But if we just took a little bit more time up front, right, to like set expectations, right, to check in with that person, are those expectations realistic or are they not realistic? And when you are the boss, right, or when you're the leader, right, it's the emperor wears no clothes, right? Mm-hmm. You're always the last to know when you're kind of, if I can use this language, when you're fucking up, right? Everyone else is talking about you and how, and what you did and this did, and everyone usually, externalizes blame. And when we talk about teamwork a little bit, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But they're always looking at this person and what they're not doing, right? And if you don't ask, like I always said to you, if the only way to know is to ask, mm-hmm. and that just ask. Are we clear, right? Tell me what we just agreed upon, right? What did you hear me just say, right? And the cool thing about everything that we always talk about, and you can use in other parts, you can practice in your every relationship that you will have will be better. There's not many things you can guarantee in life. I can guarantee your whole audience this. Every relationship in your life will be better, work included, when you take the time to set or reset expectations. And understanding if, the person you're communicating with or the group you're communicating, if everybody is clear and everybody is aligned, moving towards the same goal. And I think that's really, really important. You throw in business, you hear the words KPIs, you hear the words OKRs, right? You hear all these goals and metrics and objectives, right? And again, I go back to fundamentals. Like, what are we measuring? Why are we measuring it, right? And most importantly, where are we driving? What are we all, why is this group together? What is the purpose of this group, right? Businesses have missions, right? And some of them are good and they're all kind of bullshit, right? But like getting your group together and saying, what is our mission? Mm-hmm. Why do we wake up every morning and come to work together? What are we driving for? And taking 5 minutes in the beginning of the day and getting on a Zoom call, and hopefully, when the world heals a little bit better, that we're all actually physically together, but getting your team together. It's like football, man. They huddle up every play to just get on the same page, right? Get the play in, do that with your team. Why are we here? What are we doing? Right? What is time well spent for me today as a leader? If you can give that to your group, helping people understand where they're supposed to spend their time and why, and get everybody rowing in the same direction, your life will be a lot easier, and the goal you're trying to achieve will be a lot more easier to get to.
That's a bar. That pretty much, if the audience doesn't take anything else from this podcast, the last 2 minutes of what you just said, I can stamp back, validate 100%. Like, it didn't just affect my ability to lead, my ability to listen in the company. It also had a tremendous impact on the relationship with my wife and my kids and my parents and my siblings and my friends. And I just saw that I was able to kind of connect those dots of just asking simple questions like, how are you feeling? Right? Like, that's something I never asked anyone who'd ever worked with me before I worked with you, because I just assumed you're good. And then I'd ask, and then a lot of times you get an answer that you didn't expect. Like, I'm a little confused. And then
Bingo.
rather than take it defensively or being like, oh man, like how can you be confused? I sent an email. I go back and hey, so that's cool. I like, so what are you confused about? And just by asking those questions and having that dialogue, I could see, oh, I didn't give you this key piece of information that's in my head, and I just assumed you'd get that.
Yeah. Well, I have to stop you for a second because I only know the Yudu Gray that I know, right? I don't know the Yudu Gray before I didn't know Yudu Gray, right? But when the Yudu Gray I know created an environment where people could say they felt confused, right? So if you don't create the environment where, and you as the leader, and you don't create that environment where people can feel comfortable to say, I feel confused, they're not going to get berated, then you might ask, hey, how you feeling? They're not going to give you the true answer.
That's
So
true.
you have to, we're planting seeds all the time in relationships, and relationships have to be nourished every day, right? And just asking, hey, how's it going, is a way to nourish that seed. But, for any of your listeners who are starting a business, have their own business, if you don't create that culture where people can say, I feel confused, or I don't know what I should be doing, and you're paying that person, you're going to be wasting a lot of money paying them for nothing. So, start with creating that openness, and look, if you're a boss and you have your own business, results are important, right? And so I'm not saying that it's got to be all, flowers and how are you, but you are dealing with people, and you yourself as a leader, you're not perfect either. Your communication is never going to be perfect. It's not going to happen. I don't care what books you read, what podcasts you listen to, how much self-awareness that you have, you're going to fuck up, right? We all do, right? But what you're trying to do, and the culture that you build, and the relationships that you build with the individuals on your team, with the collective of the team, with the company as a whole, you want to build up as much equity as you can every day, because we all screw up. And that's just, we're human, right? I practice those same principles in my personal life with my family, because I fuck up a lot. And the more you build up that equity with everybody, and they know where you're coming from, and know that your intentions are good, you get a lot more passes. So I think it's really important to start with that, just asking that simple question of how you're feeling, creating the culture where people can actually say, I feel confused.
Yeah. No, that's real. And so for the folks listening and or watching, Brett Bell, I can't say was, because once you are, you always are, is an athlete, high level,
was an athlete.
high level competitor. He's and a quarterback at that. So, Brett is a natural born leader. And one of the things that I also picked up from you is that there are different leadership styles, right?
Yes.
Some lead from the front, look at me, follow me, do as I do. Some lead from the back. I let you learn from your mistakes and then kind of teach or coach after the fact. And one of the things I learned from you is that A, there is no one right way, but B, not everyone responds to your leadership style the same. Absolutely. And so now, for someone in this business, whether you own a record label, a publishing company, whether you're an independent artist and you're kind of the leader of your team, how important is it for you to kind of check in, one, understand how you lead, and then two, check in with how your team responds to that?
Great question. And it's tough, right? Because sometimes people don't even know how they want to be led. So that becomes really difficult. I think it takes time and a tremendous amount of patience and a tremendous amount of care to really understand how people want to be led, right? Some people will offer it up to you. Most people don't, especially if they haven't really been led in their life, won't really know. So time sort of unveils that. The problem is, in business, we don't have that much time, right? So, one of the things that I get most excited about in my particular field is the power of assessments, right? The power of, they're not, everyone thinks of these, when we hear the word assessments, like no one's going to get you on the couch and, not going to be like Dr. Freud. But there are, through the power of great research 60, 70 years of research, we can in under 10 minutes really understand how people like to be led. And it's not their personality, it's their behavior, right? And the reason why we do those assessments in business is to expedite that process, to give people who take the assessments a little bit more self-awareness on themselves. They know themselves best, but it's kind of framed in a way that they can digest it. But also for leaders to say, hey, here's the composition of your team. And based on the information from these assessments, this is how this person will likely want to be led. I say likely because we're dealing with people, right? There's no assessment in the world that is is 100% accurate, but you can get a pretty good idea from these assessments of how people like to be led, how people like to be communicated to, how people like feedback given to them, or there's a wide range of applications of this. And the reason really is we try to push businesses to use and leverage these assessments is, my perception of you is biased based on how I feel about you. Mm-hmm. Like in my eyes, you could do no wrong, right? So I'm always going to give Yudu Gray the pass because I know truly who Yudu Gray is, right? That's the good part. The bad part is if I have a unfavorable impression of somebody, it's going to we all know about biases, right? Mm-hmm. It's okay to be biased. You know what? Our brains are hardwired to be biased. Mm-hmm. You have to just come to a self-understanding of that we're all biased, right? Our brain is constantly trying to take shortcuts, right? If we just kind of drill back again to the blocking and tackling, you look at us as an organism, right? We're here to survive, right? And the brain, when the brain thinks, it requires a lot of energy. So the brain is always trying not to think, right? Mm-hmm. We force it to think, but it's trying not to think. So we're all going to have biases. One of the ways to mitigate bias in an organizational setting is through the use of objective assessment. And that can help us understand how people may want to be led, right? The feedback that people may want to get and how they want to get it. So that's one of the tools that we use in business to help understand what someone's preferred leadership style is.
I mean, I will never forget the day we took our first assessment. And again, skeptical as all hell. I was like, nah, like this thing can't, 10 minutes was an understatement. Like it was a series of questions. I answered it the best of my ability, and they weren't like weird questions. They were like real life scenario type things.
Yeah.
And asked in different ways. And you realize like, I answered this like this before. So I wonder like how this answer will go, but you just kind of answer it. And then you like looked at some data and you were like, oh, this makes sense. You lead this way, but you also kind of drill down like, you need time to process or you don't, right? You prefer someone communicate to you more consistently or you don't, you prefer to be reprimanded. Like it was like all these things that within 10 minutes, and you knew me again, but looking at the data for myself, I was like, wow, that's crazy. And then you take it to another level where the rest of the team who had taken their assessment, you kind of compared and you said, well, if you prefer time alone to kind of think and process before you move, but the person that's reporting directly to you prefers to communicate every day for clarity, yep. Do you see where there will be some conflict? And where if that person isn't coming to you then to say, hey, I'm not clear, they're going to build up insecurities and frustrations and you're unaware. So by the time it comes to a head, it's a much bigger issue. And you're just like, well, dude, what's the issue? Or, so like, and I think how you put it to me that day, because it was like a mind blowing moment was, if you were building a team, like, we always talk sports and analogies for me was always sports related. It was like, if you're building a perfect basketball team, you're not going to pick 5 point guards or 5 centers, right? Like you could pick the 5 most dominant big men in the game and you probably aren't winning an NBA championship because you don't have the person that is a floor general that has the ball handling that, or you can pick the 5 fastest players and they may not be able to shoot. So it's like the best teams sometimes need people with very different skill sets and then a coach to kind of say, this is how we work together. And the assessment to me was almost like the tools the coach could use to say, oh, wow, like, so if you need daily check-ins and you prefer not to take daily check-ins, if we reorganize, and that's that organizing of the company, if we can, right? And reorganizing the structure, then you will report to someone or work with someone who can communicate better. Or by putting someone else on your team who's kind of a middle person, that person will understand you need your time, but they'll also understand that you need your daily check-ins. And so sometimes it was as simple as like, hey, that team that you put together for the rollout of that artist project, by adding this person in your company on that team, they'll be more successful. And that person's role in the company may not be creative. It may not be what you think, but it's just like, just by having that person included in this text thread, you'll be more successful. And I never thought of it like that. Because again, as artists and teams, we think if I'm in a studio, I need an engineer. If I'm creating, I need a producer. It's like we have these clear defined roles and we don't take personality into consideration.
Yeah. So I want to kind of drill into that a little bit more, because I think this can help your audience. Like people who are, bringing a collective bunch of people together to further their career, right? Let's use the artist analogy, and I'll try to use everything that you've taught me over the last 4 years about the music business. But it doesn't really matter. We could parallel the same thing to the basketball analogy that you did, right? We're looking for the best engineer. We're looking for the best studio. We're looking for the best, right? And so what businesses fail to do, even big, I mean, I started cutting my teeth in this industry and doing executive assessments, right? CEOs, COOs, big, like guys who were making 800 grand a year, that I would go and I would do it. This is like a 10-hour assessment on these people, because the investment from the company was major, right? And these companies were spending all this money on leaders like CEOs who were very successful in one business, very successful. Their resumes were 30 pages long, and they demonstrated 20% growth in this industry. And then they would get hired by this other company and they would be utter failures. Well, they didn't change. They're just smart people, right? But they didn't fit into the composition or the culture of the organization they were going to. So when you look at, an artist who's looking for the best engineer, the best drummer, the best lead guitar player, right? All those things are really important, but to ignore how you work with other people and how that person you're going to bring in is going to work with you and the rest of the people who you already have in there is malpractice on your part. And you have to start to consider these perspectives. I would rather have a little bit less of an engineer from a skill set perspective, but one that fit better with a group, with me, or the group that I already had, any day of the week, than just the best, right? And that it is so critical for your audience to take a step back and say, yes, skill set is really important. I would never minimize that. Someone's skills are really important, but that's only one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is, how are they going to work with you, and how are they going to work with the rest of the people on your team?
Yep. That's a great point. Again, you're dropping all these gems. So, if you're an artist right now, a manager, a label head, an intern, it's really important for you to get a good understanding and self-awareness of kind of what makes you happy, what makes you go. And you can look at your regular life and look at the relationships that kind of work out to get a good gauge of that, right? So one of the things I did after I took the assessment was I looked at the relationships I've had for a long time, and I realized a lot of them were the people who kind of get me, right? I am a person who needs like alone time to process. Like I think a lot and I'm always problem solving, and then I'll show up with the solution, and that's kind of my magic, right? But when I'm put in a situation where I've tried to manage artists, a couple, and I was a horrible manager in my mind, horrible, like I didn't deliver as I did in other areas in life. But it's because I think the role that those artists wanted me to play as their day-to-day managers doesn't fit my personality. I'm not a call me 10 times a day, I'm gonna answer every 10 times and answer your problem and solve right away. I may have a conversation, go away, think about it, come back, here's your solution. Now let's refine it together. And so I realized I went from kind of like day-to-day manager with some artists to what we developed as like business manager. That's the role that I ended up being, where the artist, and I set an expectation of, you can include me in emails, you can include me in group chats, but don't expect me to like be on calls every day. Don't expect me to text you right back. Don't expect me to be the one to like book the gigs for you and do the day-to-day stuff. That's not where I'm going to provide the most value for you. Expect me to be the one to help you strategize the release. Expect me to want to be the one to strategize the meeting with the label or the meeting with the potential brand partner. And then I found much success. And the careers of those artists were much better off than the ones who I was like, yeah, I'm going to manage you. Like, I know the music business. I like you as an artist. Like you said, I have my bias and I'm going to be your manager. And then I end up sucking. And it's not that I'm any less skilled. It's just that probably isn't the best role for me in your career.
Right. Or with it, based on what that person needs. If that other person is like you as well and can, have that Monday morning call and then check in with you again on Friday, and they are wired like that as well. They kind of need to go off and do that. You would work in that sense, but you working with someone who needs to be connected every day or a few times a day is probably not going to work for you, and it's probably not going to work for them. And then they start to fill their head with, Yudu's not engaged. We start telling ourselves our own narrative, right? Because look, we're all a little bit narcissistic. I don't care what anybody's. We're all a little depressed. We're all a little anxious. We're all a little narcissistic. We're all a little schizophrenic, right? We're all a little of everything, right? And that doesn't mean that you're crazy, right? We all have these latent things in us, right, that make us human, right? They're only a problem when they're a problem, right? So I'm not suggesting that you have like a narcissistic personality disorder, right?
We're all a little crazy.
We're all a little crazy, like our friend said. But we all look at things through our own lens, right? And especially when we're emotional. If I'm expecting you to, I'm somebody who needs that day-to-day touch, and you don't call me for 2 weeks, I'm gonna think, what is it about Yudu that he's ignoring me?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But in the absence of the information that you give, and I love that you said that, when you're straightforward with someone, you say, hey, this is how I work.
Yeah.
Right? You start to set that, we talked about expectation at the outset of this call, you start to set that relationship expectation with that person, right? They'll still get upset, but then you can always go back to that, hey, you remember when we first got together and we were kind of hammering this out? I told you this is how I operate. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's what you need, right? And then in relationships, we always try to meet people in the middle. If somebody is diametrically different than us, it's not just saying, hey, this is how I am, and like,
put in effort.
Yeah, right? You always try to meet people in the middle, right? But you have those conversations where that person who's the total opposite, you says, well, for me to work well with somebody, I need to talk to them every day. And then you can negotiate that and set an expectation of what to expect in that relationship. And it's hard, man. It's hard. It takes time, right? But relationships take time. I think any relationship worth anything is just going to take time. It's just a matter of fact. There's no other way around it. You just got to do it. You can't take a pill for that.
And so that leads me to, I think that the next thing that I learned with you was you used the word stretch, right? And it kind of speaks to what you just said. The idea of, all right, so now I've kind of got an understanding of how I am, right? Like you said, we're all a little narcissistic. We're all a little, we're about ourselves.
Yep.
So then when you kind of shine a light on yourself and realize like, oh shit, I'm not perfect. And as a leader, I have these, whether you call them faults or quirks or just it's how I am. And then I recognize it doesn't fit with some of my team. Then the next step or the next evolution for me was then kind of realizing I would have to stretch for the company to be successful. I'd have to call people more than I would like to, or I would have to check in a little bit more than I'm used to, because that's what I'm not doing that's affecting the team's success. And so now, but you also spoke to that you can't stretch forever. So recognizing that and saying, okay, for now, I may need to do more than I'm comfortable doing, but for the company to grow, this is where, as we add team members, not just replacing role by skill set, right? Because you said you need skills and we recognize that, but also by personality would be important. And so then as it's like, all right, we need this person with a skill set to add to the company, but it would also be great if this person had this personality type. Yeah. And so that's where, as we now, build out 24/7 artists, and I have my list of roles and responsibilities and the things we'll go through, but I also have certain like personality needs that I've learned to put in our, this is our hire list.
Your pipeline, right?
My pipeline, yep.
You want to be able to, you want to have a choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
When anytime you're building out your team, right? Like my advice to your audience would be, don't hire the first person that you speak to. Like just, even if you think that they walk on water, don't hire the first person. understand, know exactly what you're looking for. Know yourself, right? Really, really important to know yourself, to really understand how you like to work, how you handle conflict, right? When the shit hits the fan, are you that person who's gonna are you that fight person, or are you gonna be that person who doesn't like conflict and just kind of puts it off to the side, where you kind of flight from conflict? So really know how you handle conflict, how you like to give feedback, how you communicate, how you lead. Just you don't need an assessment to start. Just write down in a notebook, things. Ask other people. One of the greatest gifts that you can get from anybody is honest feedback. That's one of the great, and it's free. That's one of the greatest get. And I would say, don't get feedback from one person, because that's just their perception of you. And you're really get feedback from multiple people. Ask them, hey, what do you think my leadership style is? Right? Talk about what is leadership, and then how do I lead? Do I handle conflict well? How do I handle stress? Get feedback from other people. You learn a ton about yourself. It's free. It'll actually ingratiate you to that person who you're asking for feedback for. That's actually one of the biggest, if you look at, we won't get too geeky here, but if you look at the research, one of the best qualities that a leader can have, where people perceive that person as strong and confident and secure, are those leaders of big companies who ask for feedback, right? They want to learn about themselves. The world is the best teacher to us. We just have to ask the world, and we don't have to take everybody's feedback, right? You could give me feedback about myself. I might not agree with you. That's cool. But if I get feedback from you, and I get feedback from Davina, and I get feedback from 6 other of our friends, and it's the same thing you guys said, well, kind of power in numbers a little bit, right? I better take a look at myself and be like, hey, I don't agree with that, but that's how everybody else perceives me. I want to know why. So I think that is really, really important, and it's free, and you can do it at any time. But yeah, that would be definitely a recommendation I'd give to anybody.
I love it. No, and you're absolutely right. I feel like I said, once you get to that place of oh, I'm not perfect. I'm not, I do have these things about me. The only way you really learn is by asking. And I remember, I'll say his name because obviously he's a part of the culture and part of who we are. But when I went around and asked everyone, and I asked Will, our guy, Will, the creative genius, what do you think about my leadership skill? And his response blew me away, because he was like, I love working with you. Anytime I speak to you, I feel like I can run through a wall. You make me feel like I can do anything. But I do wish I had a little bit more access to you. And he's one of the most quiet, reserved, in the corner, working on his crazy designs that blow us all away. And I would have never expected him to say that. And when he said it, I was like, you want to spend more time? I thought so now I will randomly check in with him, even when we're not working on a project, just if it's a text, just be like, hey, bro, how you doing? And I know he appreciates it. And I also use those words with him, because I don't end a conversation with him without saying, I appreciate you. And if I look at my text thread, for the last 2 years, you'll see that anytime we've communicated, even if it's about work, I'll always say, I appreciate you, because I realized I never said it, even though I thought it. And by him saying, I wish I had a little more access to you, it's damn, I realized that I really didn't pay any attention to this dude unless it was work, because that was just the dynamic of our relationship. But that's not what he wanted.
Totally. And you were reading his mind, right? You were like, this guy works really well alone. He was obviously a very skillful guy, so it's not like he needed a ton of direction. So you just assumed, right, that he didn't really need to check in with you. And that's why it's just so important to ask. That's all you got to do. And I am pretty confident more times than not, you'll be surprised, like you were, with the response that you get. Sometimes we're too proud. I know for myself, as a, this is one of my faults as a man, and how I was raised. It's you shouldn't ask for help, figure it out. Right. And that, I guess there's merit to that, and people should be resourceful and figure things out. But I don't think there's any shame in asking for help. Right. And so that's been a struggle of mine, is asking for help. So, just ask. It's really important. And I think that probably had a profound impact on your relationship with Will.
100%.
Right. And so and how long does it take? Right. Right. How long does it take to say to someone? And the advice I would give you is it's cool that you text him. Make sure you say it to him. So we can always up our game. We can
Yep.
always up our game with people every day. That's one of the
Yep.
beautiful things about life. Every day, no matter how good you are or how quote unquote successful you are, you can always be better. It never ends. It
Yep.
never ends. And that's for me, that is the most exciting part of life, is that never ends. You
Yeah.
can always be better. We can you, we, me, we can always be better. And
Yep.
that's energizing, right? That's something that motivates me every day, is that I can be better in my relationship with myself. I can be better in the relationship I have with, one single person. I can be better in the relationship I have with multiple people. I can be better in a relationship with my wife, my kids, my mom, everybody. And it never ends, right? And it's always exciting. It's always new, and it's a wonderful thing. And I would encourage all of your listeners, like, just be better, right? How can you be better? You can take it, like, doing small things can make you better. You don't have to set these lofty goals. Do a little thing every day. You'll be better.
Yep.
And you'll benefit, right? It's I don't want to, it's a very selfish act, right? It's because you're going to get the return on investment on it. But you got to be authentic. Like, authenticity is something that we haven't touched on here. For any of your listeners here who are in charge or leading, you got to be who you are. You have to be who you are. It's one of the things I immediately, literally loved about you, right? Authenticity. You were never someone you weren't. You might have thought you were sometimes, and I know, the back and forth, and we all struggle with that, but being authentic, being true to who you are, aware of who you are, is so important, because if you're not authentic, the appreciation thing and it ain't gonna work.
It's so funny. Let me see if I can pull it up. I'm working on, like, our list of hires, right? We're getting ready to hire for 24/7. And in that list, one of the things that I said was, and I want to say it was something that I learned from you, but it was, when filling out your application, we should believe everyone should strive for their ikigai, right? Which is that balance in life. Find a balance in life where you get paid to do what you love, the world needs it, and you're good at it. Yep. So be brutally honest when applying to join our team. This way, the real you will love what you do every day at 24/7 Artists. Mm-hmm. And the reason I wrote that as our hiring philosophy, and it's something that we have to live by, is, again, so now everyone's not an entrepreneur. Everyone's not going to start out a business. A lot of people watching this or reading this or listening to this are going to apply for a job, whether it's at a label or at a music tech company or at a record store, wherever it is. And we fluff our resumes with what we think they want to see to get the job.
Without a doubt.
And then you get the job based on them thinking you are something you are not.
You sell yourself.
Yeah, you sell yourself, in an inauthentic way.
But
and then you wonder why you have the perfect job and you hate it.
But let me stop you right there. Let me just say something to you. Not only are you selling yourself, if you look at the job market today, we know what's going on, with COVID. I think COVID just kind of expedited all this stuff. But I think even before COVID, there was this sort of awakening of people who are like, I'm sick of going to work every day and hating what I do, right? Mm-hmm. I want to do something, to your point, that I'm passionate about. And maybe I'll make, one thing I'll give the younger generation a ton of credit for is they're choosing, in some instances, not to paint everybody with a broad brush, but choosing happiness over money, right? Mm-hmm. And I think you can absolutely have both, to your point. But not only are people selling themselves to get jobs, but now companies are selling themselves to get you to come work there.
Yep.
That is a recipe for disaster. One of the things that I love, promote myself for a second. One of the things that I love bringing value to a business is when you're looking to hire somebody. Yes, they need to be a good fit for you, right? We talk about their skill set, their experience, their personality, how they're going to fit with the leader, the manager, the team, and we can do all those things, and that's awesome, right? The other side of that equation is, are we, the company, a good fit for them? Mm-hmm. Because I can tell you guys, if you're paying people, make sure that they are a good fit for you, mm-hmm. but you're also a good fit for them. And to your point, be brutally honest.
Yep.
because it'll save you a lot of time, effort, energy, heartache, money if you don't make the right decision.
All right. Yeah. I'll tell a story of, when House Studios was kind of now ramping up early on. This had to be like 2011. We had the opportunity to start bringing on engineers. We had like our core group, and at the time we were very hip hop R&B focused. And I was like, I don't want to be pigeonholed, which now looking back was just that thought was overthinking it. So let me go find a good like rock engineer. And so I reached out to my network, and a friend of mine was like, oh, my little brother, he went to school for engineering and he loves rock music. And I made the mistake that you said earlier. I hired the first person. So I had a meeting with him, and basically he answered what I needed him to answer to fit the hole, which was, do you like rock music and can you engineer? Okay, you've got the job. And I brought him into the mix, and it was like oil and water. Like, this dude was literally a cancer for our culture, because all of the trust, all of the things that made us a unit, right? We were broke, we're eating ramen noodles together. Like, we were literally building up, sacrificing to build this company as a group. And then this guy comes in, and his whole mindset was very different, and not a knock on him. It was, I didn't make sure he was a good fit for us, and I for damn sure didn't make sure we were a good fit for him. So how we operated, like, this is early on running a business. I wasn't paying on time. I wasn't communicating that I wasn't going to pay on time. Like, I was still learning, like all the things that you do when you start in a business. The guys who worked for me before kind of understood. They knew I was in the trenches with them, and they respected it, and they knew my intention. They knew, like, there was never going to be a day that someone gave me money and I was holding and not paying them. It was like, yo guys, like, as soon as this check come in, everyone's going to get their pay for last week. And he just wasn't with it. He was like, dude, I'm supposed to get paid on Friday. I'm supposed to get this much. I didn't get it. I have bills. You're screwing us. You don't care. And then he started telling the other guys, I don't think he cares. Like, and so, like, you could see, like, it created a fracture in our company, to the point where we ended up getting rid of him, a couple months later. But the damage had been done. There was like a pre him and a post him in our company, where I then felt like I had to be on the defense. And it was simply, I didn't go through the exercise. I definitely didn't communicate expectations. I wasn't clear on how we operated. I didn't have standard operating procedures. I didn't have anything to present to him to say, hey, sometimes I pay a little later. Hey, and had I done one of those things, I don't think he would have worked for us. I think he would have heard the list and said, this isn't for me. But because I didn't even give him the chance, it really, like, it was a learning lesson for me as a leader, as a business owner. Just what you said, like, are you a good fit for the company, which is, I think, where a lot of people focus. But on the flip side, is this company a good fit for you, for your personality type, for where you are in life, for what your needs are?
Yeah, totally. Like, and just saying, like, if you were to ask those questions, what you have to remember too, as a business leader, when you're hiring people, right? And oftentimes they're applying because they need a job, right? Mm-hmm. They want a job. They're going to tell you sometimes what you want to hear. Right? Yeah. And it doesn't make them a bad person. Like, it is what it is, right? I don't blame anybody for trying to land a job. That's why the power of asking good questions, having some type of assessment that you use, if you can't afford it, they're not super expensive, especially if you're not assessing a lot of people. But I can tell you that it will save you. So even if you're paying somebody a pretty modest hourly wage, hiring the wrong person, man, is expensive. And just doing your due diligence up front, making the investment in you, your sanity, your team, I can't say enough how much that is worth it and how critical that is. Sometimes you might get lucky. Some people get lucky. Some people say, hey, I have a really good intuition, or I got a feeling, right? And I'm going to say to you, maybe you do, but maybe you've gotten lucky, because, relying just on your gut it's a good data point, but it shouldn't be the only data point, and eventually you'll get burned.
Yeah. I love it. Okay. So as we come to a wrap, a couple things that we will do with this podcast, with these conversations, is I want the community to ask these people that I have access to, these experts, questions, related to your field, your expertise. And so the first question that I got, which is from an artist I've worked with for over a decade, Twink Drums, an amazing producer, drummer, and one of the people I communicate with often as far as like music and business. So she asked a couple questions. But I think you'll like this one. She said, what position should you fill first?
Ooh, I hate asking a question to a question. But I would, if I had her in front of me, I would say, well, first I'd want to know, what are we trying to accomplish, or where is the gap, right? Like really understanding, who do I got now and who do I need, right? Back to the basketball analogy, right? Like, if I'm the Sixers, I'll use the Sixers, right? There was a big gap, right? And so they didn't have someone who could, really handle the ball, or, really get a shot, in the last couple minutes of the game, aside from relying on a big man. That's not a recipe for success. So they identified a need, right? So I would say to you, your first is your greatest. What is your biggest need, right? And then also, what you want to consider is, what's your next move. It's like life is chess, man. It's like, it's not just this move, it's this move, and then what's the next move. And that I want everyone just to pause and think and understand, what are we building? Again, I'll go back to that mission. What is my mission? What is our mission? What are we driving for? What do I need in order to further myself to get to that goal and not leapfrog any steps? And I think that's the best way I could answer that question without having her in front of me.
I love it. That's a great answer. Hopefully Twink takes that, answering the question with a question. But that, as a leader, you find yourself asking questions of yourself all day. And I found that, like, when someone says, what does a CEO do? And I tell them, I literally am answering questions like that. I started out as an engineer, then producer, all of the creative things I've done. But once you become a CEO, a leader, and a lot of artists will find themselves the artist / CEO, understand that the role of the CEO is to answer questions and to ask questions. That's your job full time. You're either answering the question or you're asking the question. Right. You're really not building anything. You're not creating. You're relying on people with other skills, more skillful than you, often to do the work. But your job is to answer and ask questions that move the company forward. Right. And so I like that answer. And then the next question is, what's the most important piece on your team?
On my team?
On a team, on anyone's team. What's the most important piece on a team?
Your audience has tough questions. This is just an opinion answer. There's no research behind this. I'm going to say the most important piece on anybody's team in any industry is selflessness. If you can find somebody or a collection of people who are about the common goal or the common good and less about themselves and their advancement, you got it, right? Because it really kind of, anything to work, even if it's just two people working together, you got to kind of be selfless. And I think that would be the one quality. I'm not sure if the question was the quality, but that, like, to me, that's the first thing I think of is selflessness. Like people who are just like not really overly concerned about themselves, but more concerned about the collective.
I love it. And I'll put an asterisk next to that. And then, so to answer it, I would say it's really yourself then, right? So it's the key to being selfless is that you have to not focus on yourself. Yeah. And so can you take the time out when you're alone to realize that in your team, you're going in with your biases and what happened last week and what happened when you're a kid that triggers certain emotions, and then you like freak out when people do certain things. And can you check that and your ego and pride and all that at the door and come to the table and figure out how to add value in other people's lives? Yeah. Right. And that's the key, right? And so if you're building a team and you find yourself sitting at the table saying like, no one understands me and I'm so upset and I'm, then you're not doing your part in the team to say, well, all right, I that may be the case, but now let me sit at the table and say, how am I adding value to that person? How am I making that person's job in life a little easier? Have I checked in with that person to make sure they're good? And when you build that culture, and I think that was a culture we strived for, right? And what you're speaking of is a culture where everyone is making sure the other people are good, then your team will find a way to solve the problem, because problems never stop. You're constantly solving problems, but your team will work together to solve problems as opposed to work against each other when problems arise.
Yeah, and they become less problems and more challenges. Like every business faces challenges, right? problems are I don't love the word problems, right? But it's the challenges, right? When you
Challenges.
can move past problems and move towards solving challenges,
Yep.
you become better.
Yep.
And a lot of people are stuck in solving problems.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a problem.
Yeah. Awesome. And then the last one, Simon said, "Tell Brett I send my best."
Yes, I love Simon.
All right. So the very last thing, we're going to ask all of our guests this question. And so to preface it, I'll say the reason this podcast exists again is I learned from these conversations. This is another one I've learned even in this convo. And everyone doesn't have access to Brett Bell, but everyone has access to a Brett Bell or a person that can give them good advice, multiple people. But even for a Brett Bell, at one point in time, you were just starting out in your career.
Yep.
There's a person watching this right now who might say, man, like, I love, the idea of being a psychologist. I've always loved the idea of like people and communication and wow, maybe this could be my end is I could get a degree in IO psychology and work with creatives, work with creative teams, and that could be their niche. So for that young person, or more importantly, for the young Brett Bell starting out, what's something you wish you knew when you first started your career that you know now? What's a piece of advice you would give to the Brett Bell that's just starting out?
So when I pursued this degree, I was a little bit older. And I think I was aware enough when I was younger, because when I went to college initially as an 18-year-old, I wasn't ready to go to college. I wasn't into learning, right? I was into playing ball. I had no business being in school. And so if I could go back to my younger self, I would have worked my ass off for a few years till I was about 21, till I was mature enough to really value learning. And I would have not wasted 3 years really 2 years of my life and wasted other people's time and take up space, right? And I think I would have been better off, but I was lucky enough, I think, to have found my thirst for learning. And I took advantage of it, but I think I just be true to yourself. Like you don't have to go to school right away. I mean, I didn't go back to graduate school. I was 28 years old, right? So those are if I would have went from like undergrad to grad school, I would have never finished grad school. So I think go at your own pace. We're not guaranteed tomorrow, but we all hopefully will live long lives. Learning never, ever, ever stops. And, I still love learning, right? And, so I think the best advice is go at your own pace.
I love that.
Yeah, don't be, people say you'll never go back to school. Or if you want to go back to school, you can always go back to school. School will always be there.
I love that. Go at your own pace. School will always be there. And I want to give a shout out to your office or your borrowed office for that Pearl Jam book in the corner.
Oh, yeah?
I see that.
I'm a little disappointed with them, but that's
And then, Brett, obviously these conversations are great. I love that the world will get some insight as to, again, any success I have comes from a combination of these relationships and conversations. And then I learn through doing it. And I fail, and then I go back and I assess and I talk to people like you, and I try again, and then I get lucky every now and then, and people remember the lucky and they don't remember the unlucky. So I want to publicly say I love you, Brett. You've been a great friend, a great mentor, a great part of my journey and our family's journey. And I hope that this conversation does as much for others as your conversations have done for me. Obviously, we'll have many more. Last 2 years has been crazy because of the pandemic. Obviously, having this remotely is not ideal, but one day we'll have one of these, like I told you earlier before we recorded. The goal is to have you be a part of 24/7. So, for the people watching, listening, send your questions. Brett's a text away. And ultimately on our website, my goal is to have someone like you just be able to provide insight, provide value, provide assessments for artists, their teams, for labels, for publishing companies, agencies, because it's so important. And I just feel like, I couldn't start this podcast any other way. I could have started talking about publishing or royalties but before you get to any of that, if you don't check this, I don't care how great your records are. I don't care how big a deal you've gotten. I don't care how much money you have in your bank account. When you see a common thread of the biggest and the best teams kind of falling apart, it all stems from them not kind of doing these check-ins and self-awareness and communications and assessments and calling BS and not being authentic. And so all those things I learned from you, Brett. I would, be very lost if I didn't have access to you, and I thank God for you.
I appreciate that, and you've taught me a tremendous amount, and I think that's the beauty of any relationship is the reciprocity. So, yes, we haven't seen each other in 2 years, but to your face, I think the hallmark of a great friend is you don't have to talk to them all the time. But when you do talk to them, when you do see them, it's like a song yesterday. So I value that more than anything in the world. I've only known you for, 5 years, but you truly are one of my most dear friends in the entire world, and I love you and so grateful for you. And I think 24/7, we've been talking about 24/7 artists for a long time. I know it'll be successful because I know how you define success.
My guy. All right, Brett. Well, thank you again. I will have some contact info. Brett does not do social media. He is not a online person. So
check my Instagram.
You can go to his Instagram, but I don't even know if it's on his phone right now.
No, it's on my phone. I don't think I've ever made a post.
We'll find a way to get you connected with this community because what you do.
Yeah, you can give anybody my phone. You're free.
I got some crazy people following me, so I won't give your phone number out. We'll find a way. We'll find an intermediary. But thanks again, Brett, and thank you for being the first official conversation on the 24/7 Artist Podcast. This means a lot, and I'm so happy that we're able to do this.
I appreciate it, and I hope to come back soon. Love you, buddy.
Peace.